The call came on a Tuesday. The day before, I had a choice to make, one no parent should ever have to. My son, Leo, was home from school with a fever. He was too sick for daycare, and my usual sitter was out of town. I had a huge, career-defining presentation that I couldn't reschedule. So I made the only choice I could. I brought my 5-year-old son to the office. I set him up with a tablet and blankets under my desk, hoping he'd just sleep through it all. He did, mostly. The presentation went perfectly, and I walked out feeling like a hero. The next day, that feeling came crashing down. My manager, David, called me into his office. His face was grim, a look I'd never seen before. "I'm sorry," he said, and I knew what was coming. "It's a liability. We can't have children in the office." My heart was in my throat. I tried to explain, to tell him about the presentation, about the countless hours I'd put in. "I understand," he cut me off, "but we have to let you go." I remember the feeling of the humid air outside as I walked to my car. It was thick, heavy, like I was walking through water. My vision was blurred by a veil of tears, and a sick, hollow feeling spread through my chest. All I could think about was Leo. How was I going to tell him? How was I going to provide for him now? The fear was a living thing, a cold knot in my stomach that grew tighter with every step. Just a few years earlier, I had been on top of the world. I was a rising star in the company, known for my dedication. I was the one who stayed until 9 p.m., eating cold takeout at my desk just to get the project perfect. I was the one who volunteered for the thankless assignments, who always said yes, who never complained. I did it because I loved my job, but more than that, I did it because I was building a future for my son. Every late night, every skipped meal, every ounce of effort I poured into that place was for him. It was all for him. And just like that, it was all gone. Just like that, the safety net was gone. The bills were still coming. The rent was still due. The car payment, the groceries, the school supplies, they weren't going to stop just because my world had shattered. It was all on me. It had always been on me. But before, I had a plan, I had a purpose. Now all I had was a crushing sense of failure and a deep, gnawing fear of the unknown. That day, the weight of being a mother and a professional hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I was being punished for putting my child first. They said it was a liability, but what they really meant was that I didn't fit their mold of the perfect employee, the one who could work 24/7, with no other responsibilities. No messy personal life. No sick kids. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have risked bringing your child to work, knowing you could lose your job, or would you have stayed home and risked losing it anyway? Stories like these take countless hours to research, write, and edit for you to enjoy. If you'd like to support this work and never miss a story, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. But the story doesn't end there. The call from my manager was just the beginning of a long and painful journey, one that would force me to confront not just my fear, but also my deepest convictions. The next chapter would push me to a place I never thought I would go. That first month after losing my job was a blur of frantic activity. My days were a monotonous cycle of scrolling through job boards and sending out 100 applications to 100 different black holes. Every new tab I opened felt like a fresh stab of hope, and every rejection email felt like a tiny cut. My inbox became a graveyard of "we regret to inform you," each one a nail in the coffin of my confidence. The panic set in slowly, then all at once. First, it was the polite reminder from the landlord about the rent. Then the second, less polite one. The eviction notice arrived a week later, stark and official in a red envelope. It felt like a ticking clock, counting down the days until we had nowhere to go. I started looking for ways to stretch every dollar. We swapped fresh fruit for canned fruit. I learned a dozen different ways to cook with lentils and rice. The grocery runs became a terrifying exercise in mental math, subtracting items from the card until the total was just low enough to be a little less painful. The interviews were the worst part. I'd walk in, armed with my resume, my experience, and a practiced smile. I'd talk about my achievements, my dedication, and my passion. But I could see the questions in their eyes, the ones they couldn't ask out loud. What about your son? What happens when he gets sick? What happens when you have to pick him up from school? They'd ask about my flexibility and my availability. They'd ask me to explain the gap in my employment history. When I was honest and told them I was let go after a family emergency, their faces would tighten. The smiles would become a little colder, and the conversation would turn back to my resume, but the spark was gone. The unspoken judgment hung in the air, a silent third person in the room. My self-doubt was a constant companion. Every rejection made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Was I really not good enough? Was I a failure as an employee? As a mother? The guilt was a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. I had failed Leo. I had let him down. He deserved better than a mom who couldn't even keep a job. I was punishing him for a choice I had to make. One night, after a particularly brutal day of interviews, I was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by piles of rejection letters. My eyes were burning, but I was too tired to cry. Leo came and sat next to me. He put his little hand on my cheek and said, "Mommy, why are you sad?" The simplicity of his question shattered my composure. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his little shoulder. He was so small, so innocent, and he shouldn't have to carry the weight of my struggles. I told him, "Mommy's not sad, baby. Just a little tired." But he knew. Kids always know. His question, his simple, honest question, was a turning point. It was a wake-up call. I was drowning in self-pity and guilt, but I couldn't give up. I couldn't. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for him. He needed me. He needed a roof over his head, food in his stomach, and a mother who wouldn't let the world break her. So I stopped looking for a traditional job and started getting creative. I picked up a few side hustles, anything I could do from home while he was at school or asleep. I started writing articles for a content mill, getting paid pennies per word. I tried my hand at freelance graphic design, a skill I dabbled in back in college. The money was a trickle, not a flood, but it was enough to buy us a few extra groceries to keep the lights on for another month. It was an exhausting, thankless grind. The income was inconsistent, the work was often boring, and I was still living with the constant dread of not making enough. But every small win, every dollar earned, was a small victory against a system that had tried to tear me down. It was a small, quiet act of rebellion. But a question still lingered in the back of my mind, a question that I still think about today. Do you think employers should be allowed to judge parents differently, or should family never be a factor in the workplace? I was still in a tough spot, but I had a new sense of purpose, a new kind of fire burning inside me. I was no longer just trying to get my old life back. I was building a new one, brick by painful brick. But I was about to face a new set of challenges I never saw coming. The low point wasn't the eviction notice. It wasn't the hunger pangs. It was the moment I had to swallow my pride and call my sister, asking to borrow money for the first time in my life. Her voice was full of sympathy, and I felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me. She sent it immediately, no questions asked, but the simple act of asking felt like a final admission of failure. I was a professional, a dedicated employee, a single mother doing her best, and yet I was on my knees, dependent on the kindness of others. I felt like a child again, and the feeling was crushing. I was at my lowest point, on the verge of giving up on the corporate world entirely, when I saw the posting for Mason and Company Innovations. Their mission statement was different, focusing on work-life integration, on valuing employees as whole people. It sounded too good to be true, a utopian dream in a world that had shown me nothing but cold, hard reality. Still, I applied. What did I have to lose? I got the interview, and I walked into their office with a practiced, weary politeness. I was ready for the same old questions, the same subtle judgments. The hiring manager, Sarah, was different. She was warm, direct, and she looked at me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved. We talked about my past work, my skills, and my experience. The conversation was easy, natural, and for the first time in months, I felt like my resume was being seen for its merits, not its gaps. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. What are you looking for in a work environment? In terms of flexibility? My mind went blank for a second. This was the moment they would realize I wasn't the perfect, unattached professional they were looking for. I could lie, I could pretend I was completely available, but I was so tired of pretending. The thought of starting a new job on a foundation of lies felt hollow. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. I told her the truth. I told her I was a single mother and that my son was my top priority. I told her that I needed a job that understood that life happens, that kids get sick, and that a parent shouldn't have to choose between their child and their career. I expected the polite smile to fall, the conversation to turn cold. But it didn't. She just nodded, her expression full of understanding. She said, "Thank you for your honesty. We believe that a happy parent makes a more productive employee. We value our team members' lives outside of the office. We understand that life isn't always a 9 to 5. It was a small sentence, but it was like a dam had broken. I felt a wave of relief, so intense I almost cried right there in her office. She wasn't just being polite. She was being genuine. She was respecting me not just as an employee, but as a person, as a mother. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced since losing my job. It felt like coming up for air after being underwater for months. A week later, the call came. I got the job. I had a paycheck again. I had a purpose again. I had a way to provide for my son without relying on others. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I was learning a new role, building a new routine, and navigating a new office culture. My coworkers were friendly, and the work was challenging and fulfilling. It was a stark contrast to the life I had been living for the past 6 months. My dignity, which I thought was gone forever, was slowly coming back. I could buy groceries without a calculator. I could pay the rent without dread. Most importantly, I could tell my son that everything was going to be okay and actually believe it. The fear was still there, a faint echo in the back of my mind, but it was no longer a living, breathing thing. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. My confidence was growing, and I was excited about the future for the first time in a long time. Then, about 2 months into my new role, we got an email from HR. It was a company-wide announcement. A new vice president of operations was joining the team. His name was Daniel. A small jolt of unease went through me. New leadership always meant change, but something about this name felt familiar. A feeling I couldn't quite place. A feeling that told me my old life wasn't as far behind me as I had hoped. Would you have admitted in a job interview that you needed flexibility, or would you have kept it a secret to get the role? My life was finally on track. I had a new job, a new sense of purpose, and a new hope for the future. But little did I know, this new chapter was about to collide head-on with the old one, and the man who held the key to my past was about to walk through the doors of my new workplace. When Daniel started, the office atmosphere shifted. He was sharp, professional, and had an intense focus that made everyone a little nervous. He was fair, but he seemed to be watching everyone closely, especially me. Our first few interactions were brief and formal. He'd ask for an update on a project, listen intently, and then offer a concise, insightful piece of feedback. It was the kind of feedback that showed he was paying attention, that he wasn't just going through the motions. A couple of times, I caught him looking at me across the office, a thoughtful, almost sad expression on his face, but he would look away before I could meet his gaze. The truth finally came out in a team meeting about a week later. We were discussing a new parental leave policy he was proposing, a policy that was incredibly progressive and generous. My mind was blown. The very idea of it felt revolutionary. I mentioned, almost as a passing thought, that it was a huge step up from my last job at Henson Consulting, where family was seen as a liability, not a priority. There was a silence after I said it. Daniel looked up from his notes, his eyes fixed on me. "Henson Consulting," he repeated, his voice low. "I remember that." My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he friends with my old manager? Did he know David? Was he going to judge me too? I braced myself for the familiar look of disapproval. But the look on his face wasn't judgment. It was recognition. "I was there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not in the meeting. But I saw you. I was in the break room, waiting for my mom to get off her shift." He looked around the room, then back at me. He told me he was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and he'd been waiting for his mom when he saw me walk out of my manager's office. He said he saw the tears, the humiliation, the shock on my face. He said he saw my little son, holding my hand and looking so confused. He said he watched me walk to my car and drive away, and then he saw David walk back into his office, looking triumphant. The memory was so vivid for him, so personal, that it felt like he had been there in that moment with me, a silent witness to the day my life shattered. But then he said something that broke me completely. I saw it all happen to my mom, too. Time and time again. Different companies, different reasons, but always the same story. She would work so hard, give everything she had, and then something would happen with me, a doctor's appointment, a fever, and she would get fired. I was that kid, watching my mom lose job after job, watching her cry in secret, feeling like she was a failure for something that was never her fault. He told us that his mother, a brilliant and dedicated woman, had been pushed out of the workforce, her career sacrificed on the altar of a rigid, unforgiving system. He said he watched her lose her confidence, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth, all because she was a mother. He said he made a promise to himself, right then and there, that when he grew up, he would do everything in his power to change the system from within. He would create a workplace where no one had to choose between their child and their career. He said, "When Sarah brought me your resume and she told me your story, it was like looking at a ghost. I saw my mom in you. I saw that little boy in your son. And I just knew we had to hire you. I pushed for it because I saw a chance to make things right. Not just for you, but for every other mother who has gone through the same thing." The silence in the room was absolute. My mind was reeling. I had always thought I was fighting this battle alone. I thought I was just a victim of circumstance, an unfortunate statistic. But I wasn't. I was part of a story that was so much bigger than me. I wasn't just surviving. I was a symbol, a beacon of hope, a chance for someone else to make a difference. The humiliation I had felt, the rejections, the tears, they weren't just my pain. They were part of a shared experience. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was part of a movement. My fear of him melted away, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and respect. This man wasn't a threat. He was a champion. He was an ally. He was a force for good, a testament to the power of one person to make a change. And I, by some incredible stroke of luck, was a part of it. Have you ever had someone step in at just the right time in your life? How did it change you? I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't had since the day I was fired. My story wasn't over. It had just begun. But our work, our mission, was just getting started. The next challenge would be bigger, and it would test our convictions in ways we never expected. Working at Mason and Company was a complete rebirth for me. My confidence, which had been in tatters for months, began to mend, stitch by stitch. Daniel wasn't just my boss, he was a mentor. He saw my potential, not just my past. He enrolled me in leadership training and put me in charge of complex project management roles. He didn't just give me a job, he gave me a second chance at a career. He wasn't doing it out of pity, he was doing it out of purpose. He saw in me what I had forgotten I was, a smart, capable professional who just needed a chance to prove herself. I started to see a different person in the mirror. The woman who had been afraid to answer the phone, who had been ashamed to look her son in the eye, was gone. In her place was a person with her head held high, who walked into the office with purpose. My son Leo saw the change too. He was no longer asking why Mommy was sad. He saw me laughing, happy, and excited about my work. He would come to my home office and watch me present to a team on a video call, and his eyes would fill with a kind of awe I hadn't seen before. I wasn't just earning a paycheck anymore. I was modeling for him what resilience looked like. I was teaching him that you don't give up just because life gets hard. I was showing him that it's okay to fall, as long as you find the strength to get back up. The same little boy who had been a silent witness to my greatest humiliation was now watching me thrive. He was seeing the full arc of a story, not just the part where I fell. The injustice I had faced at my last job nearly destroyed me. It chipped away at my self-worth until there was almost nothing left. I was so close to giving up, to resigning myself to a life of small, thankless jobs just to survive. But I was saved. I was saved by the empathy of one man who understood my struggle because he had lived it through the eyes of a child. He didn't see me as a liability, he saw me as an opportunity. He saw the potential for a better way of doing things. He saw the human story behind the resume. The workplace often talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but for so many, it's just a buzzword. For me, it became my entire reality. I learned that empathy isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. It's what allowed a company to see me as a valuable asset, not a risk. It's what allowed Daniel to turn his childhood trauma into a mission. It's what allowed me to turn my pain into my purpose. And that's the real takeaway from this story. Workplaces must see the human story, not just the resume. They must see the struggles, the sacrifices, and the triumphs that make us who we are. They must see the parents, the caregivers, the whole people who come to work every day and give it their all. Because when they do, they're not just hiring an employee, they're investing in a person. They're building a stronger, more compassionate future for all of us. So, what's your takeaway from the story? Do you believe empathy can truly change the workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. My journey from being fired to being a leader was complete, but I wasn't the only one who had a story to tell. A year later, Daniel would get a call that would challenge his own convictions and push our company to make a decision that would redefine everything we believed in.